Welcome to JRN 3365. Today we're going to be talking about shot compositions and what you kind of need to set up your cameras for that. So we've already talked about kind of how a shot gets recorded. Now we're going to talk about kind of what makes for a good shot. So one of the things I talked about, and let me disappear for a second, is that your camera has these little TV screens either behind them or on the side. And these TV screens are called viewfinders. And the viewfinder is basically, it lets you see what the camera sees. So it lets you know if you have a good shot or not. And when you look in the viewfinders, you're going to tend to see that they're going to have this little box. And this little box is going to be just on the inside of the screen. And this is what's known as the safe area or the safe zone. So anything inside this box will be seen on television. Anything that's going to be outside the safe area is going to be cut off. So the safe area is actually superimposed in the viewfinder, and you're not going to see it anywhere but on the viewfinder. And this accounts for 10% of the image. So anything that's on this outside border is going to get cut off. So one of the things I did was I went and I had a shot of one of our sets, which is a virtual set that has two little TVs on the side of it. And so these two TVs help weather or help the anchors kind of see the video. So this is what it looked like in the raw form. And when I looked at it through the TV that was on set, I can now see that pretty much anything in that 10% border got cut off. So these little monitors disappeared from the TV because they were outside that safe zone. Whenever the video would go from the camera to the production switcher, it would get converted to go out to the television to HDMI. You're going to wind up losing some of that, a little bit of quality. So that's one thing you want to be careful about the safe zone is make sure everything that you want seen is going to appear inside that safe zone. So in a couple of these instances, they had a person's head at the top of the screen, but they were not in the safe zone. So when they got recorded, we cut it off the top of their heads. When I looked at this video of one of our anchors, I could see that his head was inside the safe zone. So I could make sure that it was not going to get cut off. So always keep an eye on your safe zone to let you know what's going to get recorded. Now, once you have your safe zone kind of set up, and you don't really have to set up, you just have to look at it. We're going to look at a couple different types of shots. The first shot is what's known as a centered shot or a close-up shot. And with this is where your talent is looking right at the camera and addressing people at home. And so with this, you're going to have a lot of times this will be like an anchor reading news, especially if there's nothing to coincide with the story, like any graphics or any video. We may just say, get me an anchor on a tight shot or give me an anchor on a centered shot. Now, the next type of shot is known as a key shot or an OTS, an over the shoulder. And with these shots, when you set up your camera, your viewfinder, there's just going to be this big empty space. And with that, and what's going to happen in that empty space is it's going to be replaced with a graphic in the production switcher. You're not going to be able to see this in your viewfinder, but everybody will be able to see this at home. Now, one other thing that you can do is instead of using a graphic that's superimposed, you can use an element of the set. So with this shot here, we have a sports anchor standing in front of a television, and this television is displaying an image. But again, the talent is going to be set up so that they're off on one side of the screen. So for a centered shot, your talent is going to be in the middle. You're going to have equal distance off. But for a key shot, you're going to have them more to one side, and you're going to leave room for a graphic. So a key shot or an OTS is going to be a shot. Again, they're looking straight at you. They're looking at the camera, and they're addressing people at home, but there's room being allocated for them to have a graphic. Now, another type of shot that we're going to talk about is what's known as a toss shot. And with this is where the attention of a segment of news, particularly like maybe sports, allows after the sports has finished all their stories, they're going to talk to the anchors a little bit about a recap of sports or a recap of weather. And so they're basically taking that information and they're tossing it back to, or the attention, they're tossing their back to the news anchor. So I can look at this shot and I can see I've got two anchors over here. They're talking to a single anchor. So that's most likely sports or weather, and they're tossing it to back to the anchors. Likewise, this shot on the right, I've got a sports anchor standing next to a monitor, and they're talking to the two news anchors who are sitting at the desk. So the sports anchor is tossing that information back. And so this is basically a medium shot. It's got medium focus. So I'm not looking at entirely complete studio, whereas with both these, it's kind of a medium. There are no parts being of the human body being cut off. So this tells me there's a little bit of gap behind the anchor here. There's a little gap behind the anchor there. Likewise, there's a little bit of gap on both sides of the screen. So this is the toss shot that basically allows them to change focus from one part of the show to the other. If it's from news to sports, sports to weather, or if you're going to go from news to an international, you may have a reporter on a different part, and they may wind up talking to them about that. The next type of shot is what's called an interview shot. And this looks kind of like an OTS shot or a key. But with this one, the person being interviewed, the subject, has a lot of room in front of their face and a little bit room behind them. Now this room in front of their face is called nose room. And then this room above their head is called headroom. And with this other shot, as you can see, we have like a looser shot or a tighter shot. He has a little bit of room behind his head, even though we are cutting off his shoulder. But he also has a lot of room in front of his face. And you can also see that they're not looking at the camera. They're looking off to the side for an interview. So when you're talking about like an interview shot, again, you may have set this up. You may have like them near the shot, near the edge of the screen, a little bit of space, and stand just like off to the side of the camera. So they're not going to be looking directly at the camera. They're going to be looking almost at the edge of your screen. So when you have this up, people can kind of see that they're not talking to people directly at home, but they're talking to a person that's being interviewed. Likewise, you could do the same thing for left or right. So with this, I've got a lot of room in front of me, got a little room above my head, and I'm looking to just, the edge of the camera, and I'm talking to the interviewer who's asking the question, which is usually going to wind up being your reporter. So this is a good example of an interview shot. She does have some good space behind her, a little bit of headroom in front of her. She has a lot of room in front of her nose. The only critique about this is at this moment, she's looking straight at the camera. You don't want that. So whenever you have an interview, you could say, hey, could you just look at my hand? If you happen to be like right behind the camera you're shooting, you say just, look off to the side. Or if you have a tripod up, then just stand and put the camera right next to you. Just stand right next to the camera and let them look to you and talk to you and interact with you to kind of get that shot. Now, this is a bad example of a centered shot. She is in the middle of the screen, but I can tell that she's looking off at an interviewer. And because she's in the middle, it's kind of throwing off the balance and the symmetry of this shot. So the way to fix this is if she's talking to people at home, either look straight at the camera. Or for this, just take your camera and move it a little to the right or move it a little bit to the left to set up a better shot. Now, another thing to consider when you're shooting is you want your camera even with your subject's eyes. So if you have your tripod like too high up, you're going to be shooting down on the top of their head. Likewise, if you have the camera too far down, you're going to be kind of shooting up their nose, and it just looks bad for both your shot and your subject. Now, you do have the ability that you might be too close to your subject, so you may want to back off and give them some space. This one looks pretty good. He's got a little bit of back room, a little bit of headroom above his head. There's the nose room in front of him, and he's looking off to the side to give you, he's looking at the interviewer or wherever you told them to look. So that's a pretty good shot. So when you're looking at eye level, always set the camera even with the subject's height. Now in this case, the camera is even with the subject's height, but the reporter is standing up, and the reporter's making their interview subject look up when they give their answers. Likewise, if you're going to get an interview and the subject is saying at the desk, set up your camera eye level, grab a chair, sit down, and that way you want them looking straight at you as well. So that's it for interview. Another type of shot you can use from time to time is the extreme close-up. And so in this one, I've got, we're cutting off the top of someone's head, we're cutting off their mouth, but for this shot, all the information is kind of in their face and their eyes that we want them to see. This was another shot from a movie called Psycho from back in the 1950s. And in this scene, the director used nothing but close ups of a person screaming and an attacker trying to attack them without actually showing any violence. It was all just done through cutaways and close ups. And it was had a very strong impact on the people who were watching this back in the studio without actually showing any physical abuse or physical harm. It was all done in creative editing. And so that's just kind of those are going to be a couple of the main shots that compositions that we're going to be using. You've got the centered, you've got the over the shoulder, you've got the interview, you've got the toss, and then there's also the extreme close up. So when you're setting things up, remember just kind of give them plenty of balance and your shots will be looking pretty good.